If it feels like we have had this discussion before, it's because we have. The last time the NASCAR Cup Series was going to Atlanta, they were in the midst of the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, and it was right after the NBA had canceled their season. It was when the NHL had, or at least, put their seasons on hold, and NASCAR was like, hey, we're still going to go. We're still going to have this race without fans, et cetera, et cetera. So we had a podcast on it. We had a discussion around this race in this exact same format. And then it got canceled. So instead, they are going back to Atlanta this weekend to try things again, and hopefully the return trip goes better than the initial one. Welcome on into the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast, powered by numberFire. That is right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and numberFire.com. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberFire.com, here to break down the Folds of Honor QuikTrip 500 down in Atlanta for the NASCAR Cup Series, and let you know all the strategies you need to know for NASCAR DFS and my favorite drivers in each salary tier. Lock for this weekend is at 3 p.m. Eastern Time on Sunday. Once again, there will be no qualifying, so you can fill out lineups as soon as qualifying order has been released. It has not been yet as of Thursday morning, so we'll not have the benefit of knowing where drivers are starting, but because the way Atlanta works, doesn't really matter all that much right where they're starting, but the qualifying ranges of drivers will matter. We'll talk about that in just a bit. If you're listening to this podcast prior to Saturday night, you can also check out our UFC 250 DFS podcast with myself and Austin Swaim, as Austin broke down his favorite fighters for UFC 250. That is coming up on Saturday. I believe lock for that is at 4 p.m. So make sure you check out the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed wherever you get your podcasts. Next week, 2 NASCAR podcasts, because there will be a race on Wednesday and then a race on Sunday. So a lot of stuff happening here in this feed. So make sure you are subscribed. And golf is back next week. So Brandon Gadul and I going to have a discussion about that coming up on Monday right here at the same time. As mentioned, though, UFC 250 is coming up on June 6th on Saturday, and there is no better way to bet the fights than on FanDuel Sportsbook. Right now, new users can get an exclusive odds boost when you sign up. Just join FanDuel Sportsbook, and they will boost Amanda Nunes' odds to beat Felicia Spencer from minus 800 to plus 250. That means you can bet up to $20 on the favorite to win up to $50. To claim your exclusive odds boost, just sign up for FanDuel Sportsbook and deposit to see the odds. 21 plus and present in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Indiana, West Virginia, and Colorado. First online wager only, except in Colorado. Must wager in designated offer market. $10 minimum first deposit required. $50 max bonus. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In Indiana, call 1-800-9-WITH-IT. And in West Virginia, visit 1-800-GAMBLER.net. And finally, in Colorado, call 1-800-522-4700. Let's take a look at the track breakdown here for Atlanta, and the big thing about this track to know is the length of the race, because it is a 500-mile race, which is 325 laps, which is tied for the second longest race at a 1.5-mile track we will have all of this season. That gives us 32.5 FanDuel points for laps led. And anytime we have a race that is this long, we need to emphasize getting lap leaders into our lineups. And for this race specifically, that's going to mean targeting studs near the front of the pack, because it's not anything to do with the heavy tire wear nature. It has nothing to do with Atlanta, hypothetically being tough to pass. It's all about the way the starting order is set. They are setting the starting lineup the same way they did for Sunday's race in Bristol. The top 12 cars and owner points will start in the top 12 spots for the race. They will then draw to set the order of those 12. Then they will do the same for cars 13 through 24 in owner points. That means the 12 cars that have had the best performances so far this year will occupy the top 12 spots in the starting order. And those are the drivers most likely to lead laps. If you look at my model entering this race, each of the top 8 drivers in my model will be drivers starting in the top 8 or in the top 12 spots. The drivers starting in the top 12 are 12 of the top 14 drivers in my model. So if you want elite drivers who can lead laps, and for this race you do, you need them to be starting at the front of the pack. To me, I think the ideal way to play this is to have two potential lap leaders at least in each lineup. At least being a key word there. You need at least two lap leaders per lineup. There have been 13 races at 1.5 mile tracks using the current rules package, which went into place after the Atlanta race last year. There have been 28 drivers who have led at least 18.5% of the laps in those races, which is equivalent to 60 laps led or 6 FanDuel points on Sunday, and 12 drivers have led the equivalent to 100 laps. So, in all likelihood, we're going to have 2 drivers on Sunday who lead a meaningful number of laps. If we can predict who that is and put them on our rosters, we'll be in a really good spot for DFS. So, from a studs perspective, I want them to start at the front. I don't care too much if they're like first or eighth, like that's not a huge difference to me. That will change things a bit, but you can run multiple grooves on this track. You can make passes. There is tire wear. There'll be comers and goers. So the difference between starting first and starting sixth is not as big as it was last week. But overall, I think the key here is I want 2 studs in each lineup, kind of regardless of where they start. As long as they're in the top 12, I don't really care too much where they're starting, but I do want 2 drivers who I think have the upside to lead laps. Less balanced lineups than we would have other places. As far as the value plays go, I want them to start a bit further back, because the qualifying procedure is going to help with that as well. We're going to have cheap drivers who will be starting in the middle of the pack, and with the way things are set up, that's guaranteed. I can say that now. I can guarantee you there will be good drivers starting in the middle of the pack. The sweet spot for the value plays so far this year in this package has seemed to be drivers starting right around the middle of the pack. There have been 3 races at 1.5 mile tracks so far this year, all of which have used the same rules package. Those 3 races have produced 8 drivers in perfect lineups who had salaries below $10,000. 7 of those 8 drivers started 19th or lower. In Las Vegas, another race where qualifying did not happen, qualifying was rained out there, so the field was set by points, 4 drivers who were cheap made the perfect lineup. They all started 19th or lower. So you can make up ground in this qualifying package, and you can make the perfect lineup, and that's a really important thing to know. We're going to have some speedy value plays starting outside the top 20, and honestly, there are even some drivers I don't dislike who are going to start between 25th and 36th. So we're going to have good place differential drivers at our disposal, and more often than not, we should be looking to take advantage, because those are the kinds of value plays that tend to pay off on this track type. So from a roster construction perspective, our default build should be 2 studs who can lead laps, and then 3 value plays who can get place differential. If you find a mid-range play who can also lead laps, and we'll talk about a couple, that's even better, and there are enough laps for that to be viable here, and potentially get a 3rd lap leader in your roster. So that's the way I'm looking at things overall this weekend. To determine which drivers are capable of doing that, whether it be leading laps or moving their way forward, just look at recent races in Charlotte and Darlington, because Atlanta is, I guess, kind of a blend of those two. It is a 1.5 mile track with heavy tire wear. Charlotte is the exact same configuration and the exact same length of Atlanta, and Darlington has heavy tire wear. So if you combine those two together, we should know who is going to compete on Sunday. We can also look back at races earlier this year in Fontana and at Las Vegas. Fontana, heavy tire wear. Las Vegas, a 1.5 mile track, though with lower banking than Atlanta. So outside of the races where we were going back to the same location for the second time in a couple of days, this is arguably the best data we've had going into a race that we've had all season long. That is a good thing. We want good data to inform our decisions, and we have that here. And we should lean heavily on that info to decide which drivers we want to target, both among the studs and among the value plays. So to recap here, strategies for Atlanta, we want 2 studs to lead laps in each lineup. We want to look for place differential among our value plays. Also look for potential mid-range lap leaders. And if you're trying to decide any of that, lean on the data from Charlotte and Darlington, and to a lesser extent Las Vegas and Fontana, to decide which drivers can stand out for DFS. Those are the strategies for this weekend's race. With that in the books, let's move to our tier-by-tier breakdown based on the salaries over on FanDuel. Starting off with the elite tier, that is Kevin Harvick at $14,000 through Martin Truex Jr., who is $12,200. And to me, I think Harvick absolutely deserves to be the favorite for this race. He ranked first in my betting model right now, but it's not just that he is first. He is really in a tier of his own. It is actually the 8th best ranking anybody has ever had in my model dating back to the start of 2019, which is insane when you consider that there is no practice. Practice can really move drivers in the positive direction. We don't have that data on Harvick, but he still grades out as being like really, really good in my model. There have been 9 drivers with a model projection within a half position of Harvick in either direction, and those drivers have won 4 of the 9 races and have been in the top 10 all 9 races. So I think Harvick is first. I think he is in a tier of his own, and I'm going to try to be overweight on him this weekend, regardless of where he draws for qualifying. Track history doesn't matter all that much to me, but Harvick has also been good this year, so I would say he is your deserving number 1 stud for this race. After Harvick, my model ranks this tier Joey Logano, Chase Elliott, Brad Keselowski, Martin Truex Jr., and Kyle Busch. A lot of times I will disagree with my model. I don't disagree here. I think that's actually the way I would rank them personally as well. And I'm comfortable being low on Busch again because he just hasn't really had it this year. He has yet to have a top 5 average running position this year, even if we lower that to top 7 average running positions. He has done that once so far this year. Whereas last year through the first 9 races, he had done that 8 times. So I am okay being off of Kyle Busch a bit. I'm also okay being high on Joey Logano and Brad Keselowski. The Penske Racing cars were dominant here last year, all 3 of them. Keselowski won, Logano and Ryan Blaney both had cars capable of winning, but just got pinned a lap down due to a poorly timed caution. The model has Logano ranked higher due to what he did mostly in Las Vegas, but he was good in Charlotte too. So I'm actually okay ranking them the same way my model does, which is Harvick, Logano, Chase Elliott, Keselowski, Truex, and Kyle Busch. The second tier on FanDuel is Denny Hamlin at $12,000 through Jimmie Johnson at $10,000. And in this tier, Johnson is the only one starting outside the top 12. And I am okay with him here. If there is a cheaper driver I think has the potential to lead laps, or if there is just, I have the salary. Like if I have the salary to get to Johnson without giving up laps led, I will use him because I think that's totally okay. We could get a situation similar to what we had last week because in that race, I thought Ryan Blaney had a lot of lap slide upside, but he was really cheap. And so when I paired Blaney with Brad Keselowski or Joey Logano for my lap leaders, I had enough guys at the front to lead laps, and I had the flexibility to afford Jimmie Johnson. I think that's probably where I'll be again this weekend. But Johnson overall is in a pretty good spot. He was fast in Darlington, the heavy tire wear track. He had a top 10 average running position in Las Vegas, Fontana, and Charlotte. So he's a situational guy where he needs to fit your bill. You need to make sure you get your lap leaders in first because he's probably not going to do that. But I will definitely get some Johnson in the lineups where I can afford him without giving up laps led. Blaney factors into that equation once again here because he is $10,500. And last year in Atlanta, Blaney led 41 laps after starting 26th. He had a really good car, just didn't get the finish to show for it. He finished 3rd in both the Charlotte races this year. He almost won in both Las Vegas and in Fontana. So Blaney is a really good option if you want someone who is cheap and can lead laps and can win. Blaney fits that really well at 10.5. Alex Bowman, a bit more expensive, but he's kind of in that same mold too. He won in Fontana, the heavy tire wear track. He won stages in Charlotte and Darlington and is due for some positive regression from a finishing perspective. So Bowman fits. Kurt Busch is $11,000. He runs well here, and he runs well in general on tracks with heavy tire wear. He had a top 10 average running position in one of the Darlington races and one of the Charlotte races. So Busch is in consideration. The reason that I'm lower on him than Blaney and Bowman is that I don't think he has the same potential to dominate and lead a lot of laps. So I think that Blaney and Bowman can do that. Because Blaney's cheaper, I will put him highest among that 3, followed by Bowman and then Busch. but I am willing to consider all three of them to potentially lead laps and finish really well. Denny Hamlin's in this tier from a salary perspective, but his true speed, I think, is in the next tier up. He's kind of similar to Martin Truex Jr., where he's been really good this year, and he's kind of cheap. So I would say that Hamlin is atop this tier, then Blaney, Bowman. I'd go Johnson ahead of Kurt Busch, despite the fact that he's not going to lead laps. And then Kurt Busch would round out this tier. But everyone's in play. If you like them, that's just the way that I would rank them personally. The mid-tier on FanDuel is William Byron at $9,400 through Eric Almirola at $8,000. And in this tier, we have a couple of guys starting in the top 12. Those are Clint Boyer and Eric Almirola. I'd rather use the guys starting further back within this tier. But Boyer is at least kind of interesting for tournaments. He has had average running positions of 6th and 8th the past two Atlanta races. He generally runs well on slicker tracks, as evidenced by his runs in Darlington. And Stewart Haas racing cars have speed on this track type. So Boyer is a tournament consideration for me, even though he's definitely not going to be in a cash game roster. For cash games, I would be most interested in Matty Benedetto, William Byron, and Eric Jones. I think for upside, you look at Byron and Jones first, and it could kind of go either way between the two of them. Byron has just been so fast this year, but he hasn't been able to convert. Jones has finished better. He just hasn't shown the same upside. Jones did have a top 10 average running position in both the Darlington races, so he can do well on a slick track. He was 7th here last year, so I kind of go back and forth, but I think that if we're talking cash games, I think I might go Byron over Jones just by a hair. I think upside is consideration in cash games too, and Byron has that. So Byron over Jones in cash games, Boyer over Almirola for the tournament plays at the front, and I would rank both Byron and Jones ahead of Boyer in tournaments as well. So he's consideration, but not a priority for me. The wild card here is Matty Benedetto at $8,600 because he's had bad results recently, which means he will now start outside the top 12. He had been starting inside the top 12 previously, but if you tell me right now on Thursday morning, Matty Benedetto will start 24th, with the speed he has in that car, I'm going to have a lot of Matt DiBenedetto. He could go nuts from that position. So DiBenedetto at $8,600 is probably someone I would consider for cash games, depending on where he draws, but he is a tournament play, a great tournament play. I just don't think he has the same upside to win as Jones and Byron, which matters. So if any of those guys draws a 24th starting spot between Byron, Jones, DiBenedetto, I am going to love them for cash games. But I think all three are in play for tournaments. If they draw higher, ranked in the order, Byron, Jones, DiBenedetto. The value tier is Tyler Reddick at $7,800 through Ricky Stenhouse Jr. at $6,600. And everyone in this tier is starting in the same tier. They're starting between 13th and 24th. So I think I can just rank them straight up. The guy at the top of that list might be a surprise, but it's Austin Dillon. Dillon is $7,500. He is $300 cheaper than his teammate Tyler Reddick. And Dillon has been really, really good since coming back from the break. He has had a top 10 average running position, or he did have a top 10 average running position in both the Charlotte races. Reddick was good in those too. So I'm not trying to downplay him, but Dillon's recent finishes are really legit. So I am in on both those guys because they were so good at Charlotte, and I know they're not going to qualify all that well. So I'm going to put Dillon slightly higher than Reddick, but I think that both those guys are going to be good plays this weekend. After that, I would actually go Matt Kenseth at $7,000 in this tier. He hasn't been very good since coming back, but he's also in the same equipment as Kurt Busch. And Kurt Busch is $11,000, whereas Matt Kenseth is $7,000. That's a huge gap. And in theory, they have the same cars. So Kenseth, I think, should get respect from us due to the equipment alone. I prefer Austin Dillon because he was so good at Charlotte, but Kenseth at $7,000 could contend as well. So Kenseth would be next up for me behind the two Richard Childress racing cars. I'd go Newman and then Ricky Stenhouse Jr. to round out this tier. The punting tier on FanDuel is Chris Buescher at $6,300 on down, and there are some really fun names in this tier starting outside the top 24. The two main ones are Christopher Bell and Cole Custer. Bell had a top 15 average running position in both the Charlotte races, and again, that's a sister track to this one. He won the Xfinity Series race in Atlanta last year. He mopped up. He led 142 out of 163 laps. That is domination. So I think what we've seen since the break is Bell getting used to the Cup Series car and rounding into form, which is good. I will buy into that surge on a hyper-talented driver. Cole Custer actually did finish second behind Bell in that Xfinity Series race last year. But to me, the main appeal in Custer is his equipment. Stewart-Haas Racing is going to give him a fast car, and he could be starting as far back as 36th. So it's going to be Bell over Custer for me, and I think both could be really solid values if you want to get up to guys like Jimmie Johnson, like William Byron, and like Eric Jones for their place differential. So Bell and Custer, really good punting options. We have 3 drivers starting in the top 24 in this tier. It's Chris Buescher, John Hunter Nemechek, and Bubba Wallace, and that does hurt their appeal, especially given that we have Bell and Custer who will not be starting that high. So I'm going to rank Bell and Custer higher than these guys no matter what. But they'll at least have some reason for consideration. Buescher finished 9th in Atlanta last year in worse equipment than he has right now. Nemechek and Wallace both had top 18 average running positions in the second Charlotte race. Wallace was also up there in the second Darlington race with heavy tire wear. So I'm not out on those 2 guys, or these 3 guys, I should say, with Buescher in there. And I'd rank them Buescher, Nemechek, and Wallace. But I know that no matter how qualifying breaks, the draw breaks, I am going to rank Christopher Bell and Cole Custer as the main cash game considerations and the main tournament considerations in this tier as well. And then I'd also throw out Ryan Preece at $5,000, especially if he draws like at the back end of this tier, of that 25th through 36th tier. Ryan Preece would be really good. We've seen Ricky Stenhouse Jr., his teammates, run well. Buescher ran well in this car last year at this track. Preece has had some really bad luck, so willing to go to Preece, but I rank him below both Bell and Custer within this punting tier. All right, let's close up shop here with the picks to win, one above $10,000 and one below it on FanDuel. And I can't go against the model when it is so vehemently saying that Kevin Harvick should be the favorite for this race. So Kevin Harvick, to me, is the favorite. I would consider betting Kevin Harvick, even though his betting odds are super short. He's plus 460 on FanDuel Sportsbook. It's really short. I would consider him at that number. So Kevin Harvick, my pick to win among the expensive guys. Among the cheaper guys, we're going to stay in-house and go with Clint Boyer, Kevin Harvick's teammate at Stewart-Haas Racing. Really good in Darlington, had a top 10 average running position in both those races with the heavy tire wear. He's been good the past 2 years in Atlanta and really good equipment. So Kevin Harvick and Clint Boyer, my 2 picks to win for this weekend in Atlanta. That is all the time that we have for today. Once again, though, a lot of good stuff coming up here on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed. Already have the UFC 250 preview with Austin Swain posted. Next week, we have a pair of NASCAR podcasts and a PGA podcast with myself and Brandon Gadula. So make sure you are subscribed to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed. And if you like what you hear, please leave a rating and review as well. Big thank you to Calvin Theobald, our video producer, for running the video side of things here today. All these podcasts, or at least most of them, are going up on the FanDuel YouTube page as well. So if you want to see a video version, you can subscribe to the FanDuel YouTube page. Thank you, Cal, as always. And finally, thank you to everyone for tuning in today. I hope you all are being safe, being active, making your voices be heard, and trying to make a difference in this world. I appreciate everyone who has done so already, but just be safe and be healthy, and hopefully we can have some fun watching some NASCAR this weekend and hopefully try to get to a better place in this world in the very near future. We'll talk to you all again next week. Good luck with your lineups. This has been the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast, powered by numberFire.